All right. All right, welcome to our breakdown of the chest trauma scenario that we just posted this morning. Hopefully y'all doing okay. Just kind of getting a couple things set up here for you. Make sure everyone is on the same page and gets on the live.
Breaking news tonight, CBS News confirming that
Whoa. All right. Okay, so let's get started. Hopefully you all doing well. Right on. Well, perfect timing there. So before we get started, waiting for everyone to kind of file in here. What I'd love to do is get everyone kind of a shout out. And so who here is watching from, or you know what, better off, where are you guys watching from? Where are you all watching from today? Is it Canada, the US? Is it overseas? Where are all watching today? And we'll get started once everyone kind of gets filed in here. We kind of get the hellos out of the way. New York City, right on. South Carolina, SoCal, Florida, Arizona, Cali, Texas, right on. Oregon. You know, it's funny that people from Texas, they always write it in caps because they're just like, they're so proud to be from Texas. Everyone from Texas writes in caps because they're just pumped. Everything's bigger in Texas. Is that how it works? Rhode Island, Illinois, Edmonton. From my area, right on, from Edmonton, nice. I just missed what the rest of the comments said, but I think I saw everything. Oh. Perfect. All right. Well, it's great to see everyone. Oh, get around here. Not a lot of room in this office these days, filling it up with too many things. Mostly cameras. So today, we're going to be talking about chest trauma and the patient that we posted this morning. Don't worry, we'll go through the video as well, just so you can get an idea of kind of what everything we're talking about, put some context to it. So let's kind of get into that. Okay, so if you're just kind of tuning into us, you haven't heard of us before, my name is Geoff. I'm with Master Medics. I'm the owner and lead educator with them. And we're a team of paramedics and educators that are building a better system for paramedic EMT students. What we do is that we give you a visual approach to knowledge, so that way you can get a better understanding of how things work in the body, so that way when you're faced with your exams, when you're faced with tough questions, when you walk on an ambulance, you're not stunned, you're not scared, you're not worried that you're going to make mistakes because you understand things. That is what we do. And we've got that backed by thousands and thousands of students. Over 25,000 students have been through our paid programs, not just on social media, those kind of things, through our paid programs, and have used us to get past their exams all over the world, in the US and Canada, everywhere. And so if you're interested in checking us out, if you want some help and want to see if we can do the same for you, you can sign up for a 3-day free trial at the links on our social media pages and check us out there and see what you like. And if you don't, you can cancel anytime. You're not going to get charged if you cancel within the first 3 days. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into this case. Okay, you're dispatched to a 38-year-old male patient who was stabbed. You arrive to find your patient conscious, laying against a trailer, And he has 2 visible stab wounds, as you can see here, that are covered here. One in the upper left chest and one kind of almost looks like just below the liver. He has 2 visible stab wounds, and he is conscious. And so I'm going to show you a bigger picture of the vital signs here, so don't worry about that. Whoa, I forgot to hit record on one other thing. All right. So, being dispatched to a 30-year-old male patient who was stabbed, you arrive to find the patient conscious, laying against the trailer. There's 2 visible stab wounds, as we saw in the video. So that's where we're at right now. And what we need to do is that now we need to kind of take a look at the vital signs, and then we're going to talk about some of the treatment that I asked you about in that video. So let's take a look at these vital signs. So you have a heart rate of 138, a SpO2 of 84%, and a EtCO2 of 28 with a respiratory rate of 28, and an NIBP, a blood pressure with a MAP of 58, and a systolic of 78 with a pressure or a diastolic of 49. Okay, so here comes our first question for you all. Throw it in the comments. Based on these vital signs right now, is this patient in a compensated shock or a decompensated state of shock? And just judging, we don't really know right now, but for bonus points, what type of shock do you suspect this patient is under right now? Okay, given where the stab wounds are, given the blood pressure that we're seeing here, everything we're seeing here, EtCO2, is this patient in a compensated or decompensated state of shock? And for bonus points, what type of shock do you feel he is most likely suffering from? Go ahead and throw that in the comments. Hypovolemic, you feel he's compensated, obstructive, decompensated. Oops. Feel decomp, delayed compensation, hypovolemic, decomp. Okay. I'm just gonna see what Instagram thinks here. Ooh, scroll down. Oh my gosh. Somebody give up. There we go. Hypovolemic, decomp, obstructive. Okay, so you guys are kind of on the same track as me. I would agree that this patient is in a decompensated state of shock. Okay? Decompensated state of shock. So with this decompensated state of shock, the reason I say that is that the blood pressure is not compensating. They are below a regular perfusion of 58, okay? Your normal MAP should be 65. This is clearly a patient that's not able to maintain or sustain what's going on. So they are in a decompensated state of shock. And the bonus point question, what type of shock is this patient in? I would suggest, based on where the stab wound is, based on the EtCO2 being 28, and the blood pressure being low, I would suggest that it is most likely that this patient is in a obstructive shock due to potentially a tension pneumothorax. If you said hypovolemic, I don't think you're wrong by any means guessing that. It could be a combination of both, truly. But based on where we're going with this one, my first guess or my first priority would be thinking obstructive shock, so that way I don't miss that that needle decompression if it needs to occur. Okay, so just to kind of give you a quick little review, is remember that your lungs are encased in a pleural space, okay? And these pleural spaces are filled with basically air. And the idea is that this area here is supposed to be under negative pressure when we're trying to inhale. So when we inhale, we're actually flattening our diaphragm or expanding our rib cage to create negative pressure inside this pleural space. And when we create negative pressure inside this pleural space, it allows for air to draw in. In this situation, when we have a patient that has a break in this, okay, they no longer have a fully functioning pleural space. It means that we can't create that negative pressure in that pleural space. And when we can't create that negative pressure in that pleural space, that lung has a difficult time expanding. All that air will often rush to the better lung, the lung that is able to create negative pressure, because that's just how atmospheric changes work. When we can change the level of pressure that's where air is going to follow, which means that this lung, unfortunately, isn't going to be able to inflate or expand like it's supposed to. Okay, and then as this develops, because we have this open air in here, what could happen as well as we still continue to flatten our diaphragm is that air can now sneak into here and essentially get trapped in this location, and it can accumulate and accumulate and accumulate and accumulate and accumulate to the point where all of this air is putting pressure on this lung. And eventually, this lung can no longer even expand at all. And remember, your heart is sitting right here in the mediastinum as well, so this pressure could eventually put pressure on the heart, and the heart can no longer expand and contract. So that's where this cycle or this is developing to. Okay, so when it comes to open pneumothoraxes, which is what this is, or any open chest wound like so that you see the potential that we could develop these types of pneumothoraxes, my question to you is, should we be using a three-sided or a vented seal, okay, an occlusive dressing with a vented seal, or should we just seal it up completely and just leave it completely closed off? Okay, there's some real interesting stuff that's coming around here. There's some people that are saying one way, there's some people that are saying the other. There's benefits and negatives to both. What do you all think? Should we be using a three-sided occlusive dressing with a vent, or should we just close it off completely? Go ahead, throw it in the comments what you think. Ashman seal. So an Ashman seal would be considered a vented seal, a commercial vented seal. Completely closed. Chest tube, that would be ideal. Completely three-sided. Three-sided. Okay, so I would say that I was expecting this exact split. So a lot of you are saying four-sided to completely close it off. A lot of you are saying three-sided in case there's a vent, or use a commercial device that has a vent. And depending on what your protocols say and what books you're reading, will give you advice on one or the other. Okay. Traditionally speaking, three-sided make the most sense. Okay, and the reason being, if I'm going to go back to this picture here. Actually, you know what? I have another one over here. The reason being is that remember is that the air is getting into this area. So when I breathe in, that's the opportunity that air is able to try and get into this pleural space. Okay, but when I breathe out, it closes off that area. That means that the pressure is equalizing, and that means that air, technically speaking, if I have an open area, is that air and blood can escape. I'm going to use a different color than that. Can escape out of the pleural space from a vented seal. So that's why, traditionally speaking, three-sided was commonly taught. Is that during times of exhalation, the pressure wasn't nearly as high, okay, and then air could get out of that pleural space. But during inhalation, the occlusive dressing pressed against that area and allowed for proper expansion and negative pressure to occur, and didn't allow for air to accumulate in there as long as there was no damage to the lung itself. Okay, so that was traditionally speaking. Now, four-sided is now being commonly taught. To my understanding, it is the go-to for TCCC. I don't know a lot about that. I'm more civilian side myself and critical care. But four-sided is being taught in some places. And it's not wrong by any means whatsoever. There are risks and benefits to that, is that the three-sided, while it has its negatives where it can still be clogged and it can end up building pressure, the certain aspect of the four-sided is that if the lung is damaged and we're leaking air from the lung side, is that air can accumulate inside that pleural space and it has nowhere to go. The studies that were done showed that tension pneumothoraxes did develop more commonly and quickly in four-sided non-vented seals than the three-sided. Okay, but you had a much better seal for ventilation with the four-sided. So my advice is, one, follow your protocols of what it says during your protocols. The second thing is that if you are using a four-sided vented or non-vented seal, you need to be assessing for tension pneumothoraxes over and over and over again, because the likelihood of them developing is high with a four-sided seal. So reassessment is key for those patients if you're using a four-sided seal. If you're using a vented one, they can absolutely still happen where you can still develop a tension pneumothorax, but the incidence of occurrence was lower between the two. And so regardless of which one you're using, tension pneumothorax was still a possibility. And what was very important is that we reassessed over and over and over again for the development of it. Okay, so that's kind of where that's coming from, is that four-sided definitely makes sense, but the chances of tension pneumothorax is high or higher. So let's go back to these vital signs again and take a look. Now, we've kind of talked about this already, but based on these vital signs, a tension pneumothorax is a pretty high possibility right now. But what about these vital signs is suggesting that? So when you look at these vital signs, which one in particular, or which ones in particular are telling you that there is a definite possibility of a tension pneumothorax? Go ahead, put that in the comments. Low O2, definitely. The MAP, for sure. The heart rate, the respiratory rate, all things that could happen in any type of shock, remember. There's another one that kind of really bumps out at me. So the SpO2 is a big one. The heart rate's good, is an important one to take it, but that will happen in any shock. So that really doesn't give it a big indication. What is something that jumps out at me is your CO2. Remember, CO2 has two ways of, or two things that it's monitoring. First off, it's monitoring your respiratory rate. Okay, and it determines, like, if you have a too high respiratory rate, you'll lose more CO2. If you have too low of one, then you'll gain CO2. That's one way. But it's not a great accurate indicator of CO2. Sorry. So going back to the CO2. Respiratory rate is determining CO2. Maybe if you have a low respiratory rate, your CO2 will go up. If you have a high respiratory rate, your CO2 will go down. But there's also another caveat to that, is that it's not a great reading of respiratory rate if we're in low perfusion states. Because if we are in low perfusion states, it means, remember, this CO2 is determined by how well, if this is an alveoli, how well blood can get past that alveoli and offload CO2. And so if you have a low CO2 in a low perfusion state, that is suggesting that we're having a low amount of CO2 that's being offloaded to the alveoli to be respirated out. So this low CO2, while some of it could be the fact that we have tachypnea, a good portion of that will be because we have a low perfusion state. So this CO2, or sudden drops in CO2, can be a really good indicator of poor perfusion states, and in this case, could be a good indicator of a tension pneumothorax. Okay? Which leads us to our needle decompressions. So based on your protocols or your learning, what locations are you typically taught to decompress at? Go ahead and put that in the comments. What locations are you typically taught to decompress at? Second intercostal, above the bone mid-clavicle, fourth intercostal space. Second intercostal, fifth, sixth, fourth, fifth. Okay, so traditionally, the most common place to decompress was the, make sure I got a good color here, the mid-clavicle line. Okay, I'll bring this guy out. Okay, so most common place, or what used to be traditionally speaking the most common place, was the mid-clavicle line. Okay, but in the second intercostal space. Okay, so mid-clavicle, we'll focus on that in a sec. This is your first intercostal space. This is your second intercostal space. So best way to identify that is that you won't be able to see it very well on video, but right here is a big lump. Okay, it's kind of a line, almost feels like a hill when you feel it. That's the angle of Louis. That guy right there is actually where your attaching point of your second rib is. So if you find that angle, you palpate out and you'll feel that second rib. From there, you know that you're going below that place. Okay, you're going below that second rib. So the next thing you have to find, once you find the kind of the horizontal location, you need to find the vertical location. Now, if you have a skinned person, which you typically will, you won't be able to decompress the skeleton, is that the clavicle actually comes out to the shoulder. And so it's very easy to misalign with the mid-clavicle point. In fact, it's very common to actually think the mid-clavicle line is more like here, which is actually pretty medial. It's very anterior. And very kind of more center or more middle. But the mid-clavicle line is actually more out here, which is more of where the nipple line is, as opposed to closer to the center. So you actually want to be mid-clavicle, which is further out here towards the shoulder. The second intercostal space above the third rib. So that's traditionally speaking where we're typically decompressing the chest. Now, the more common one that we're starting to see is the fourth and fifth intercostal space. Okay, so first, second, third, fourth intercostal space, mid-axillary line, which cuts the body in half, and decompressing here. Okay, right here. Now, the reason that we're switching is mostly because this is typically easier to landmark. There's less room, there's more room for error. If you're a little bit more anterior, a little bit more posterior, that's okay. And the big thing is that the failure rate of the needle decompression was much higher in the anterior position than it was the mid-axillary position. In fact, the least amount of error was in the fourth intercostal space and mid-anterior anterior axillary line, which is more like anterior from your mid-axillary. But anyways, I digress. The most common place that we're now seeing a lot of decompressions, mid-axillary, fourth intercostal space, decompress here. Okay? So that is that. Now, keep in mind, too, that just because you decompress once doesn't mean that it won't happen again. So you need to be continually reassessing this patient to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Okay. So as far as other treatments that we can look at, okay, there we go, we're back. So, other treatments that we can look at, TXA, from a bleeding perspective, we could certainly give in this situation, okay? And fluids, because there is probably a hypovolemic component to this. But now as far as fluids go, follow your local protocols, obviously, but just keep in mind that fluids we're finding more and more evidence that fluids are not a benefit in even substantial fluid or blood loss. What this patient really needs is a hospital in order to get surgery and blood products. And so more and more services are carrying blood products or having quick access to blood products, which is fantastic, which is what we should be giving these patients, and using fluids as only a temporizing measure to buy this patient some time to get to blood products. And so maintaining a MAP of 60 to 65 and a systolic of 80 to 85, 85 to 90 is all we're really shooting for with these fluids. And so giving as little as you possibly can to sustain those blood pressures. That's the goal, until you can get this patient to some blood products that are more beneficial. Okay? So, we've covered what type of seals we can use between a vented and a non-vented one and the dangers of using either one. We've talked about needle decompressions for tension pneumothorax and what to look out for to suggest that this patient is having a tension pneumothorax. And we've talked about TXA and the potential use of fluids to temporize your patient. If the tension pneumothorax appears again, do we decompress again? If so, where? Yes, you would decompress again, and you could just be a little bit more anterior to your location. Okay, if you're using the mid-axillary line, just simply a little bit more anterior to that location. Okay, a lot of services are now using Turkle needles, which are kind of an in-place, continuously vented device, which is kind of nice. But yes, if you don't have access to it and you have a single-use decompression catheter, there's potential of it can stay in place, but it can also get clogged with blood or collapse. And so that would require potentially another needle decompression. These patients often need chest tubes in the end. And so yes, you would just simply needle decompress again if you absolutely needed to. Okay, so any other questions with this case? Go ahead, throw them in the comments. You would give your TXA through an IV. There's really no reason to give it neb, even in a hospital. All right. If I see any other questions. Okay, I think we've covered everything. If you do have questions, you can always put them in the comments on the video recording, and we can hopefully get back to them and help you answer those questions. But thanks again. If you're on TikTok, you want to review this. Unfortunately, it doesn't save on TikTok because it's too long. So you can go to either Facebook or Instagram in order to review this if you'd like, or you can get continuing education credits for this class. If you become a Master Medics member, this will be an interactive case that you can go through on your own and get an hour's worth of credit if you want to do that as well. So that's how our continuing education works, is that you get credit for case-based stuff like this and interact with the videos themselves. It's a lot more fun than just kind of clicking through slides to get those credits. We do it in a much more entertaining, interactive way. So thanks again for joining me today. I do appreciate it. And we will see you on the next case. Bye for now. Yeah, pain management, I would go fentanyl for sure, if needed. He could have both tension pneumo and a cardiac tamponade, but this patient would get really, really bad really, really quickly. What would happen if you used PEEP for this patient? If he had damage to that lung, then the PEEP would expand the alveoli, but that damaged alveoli that has leaks would allow for that air to escape even quicker into that pleural space and cause tension pneumothorax to occur faster. So there's potential of damage or danger there. Okay, take care, everyone.